Hello, I am Lauren MJ. You can follow me on Twitter at LMJ_OU. And I like to do helpful videos to help people that are novices at Linux to get more comfortable with it. In this video, we're going to be covering these few things. I've got an outline written here. We're going to download and install VirtualBox. This will help us to mimic having a real computer and being able to load Ubuntu Server on it. You don't have to use VirtualBox, you can use others, but VirtualBox is a free one and it's fairly easy to use. I chose Ubuntu Server because Ubuntu is a very popular distribution, and I chose the server package because it is basically installs a headless server, what they call a headless server. It's a server that doesn't have any desktop functions to it. And that's what we prefer to do for this particular case, and I don't use Linux for my desktop. Obviously, I'm using a Mac for my desktop, but as my server software, I'm going to be using Linux. So that's what we're going to use, is the server software of Linux. I'm going to show you how to install all this, going through some of the questions you'll get when you uninstall, what they mean. As soon as we're done install, we've got an unpatched system, so we're going to work on patching it. I'm going to show you briefly how to install and use one particular app that's going to be useful for us in the future. I'm also going to show you how to adjust the firewalls both on Linux, the host firewall, this is what they call a host firewall, and then also my ISP, which this will differ in your case, of course, but I can't show all different variations of this process, but I'll show you my variation of the process, so that way we can at least get one, and you'll see the principles involved. Again, just as an introduction, I'm recording here from the fabulous city of Moore, Oklahoma, and we're going to go ahead and dive into this video. First thing we want to do is download VirtualBox and download Ubuntu Server. So I'll go through these things with you briefly. First thing you want to do is point your browser to virtualbox.org and then click Downloads. For our case, we're running on OS X. If you're running Windows, you'd use this one, but we're running an OS X, so I'm going to install this one. Go ahead and click download. This will take a little bit of time. As you can see, it's 109 meg. It's going to take a little bit less than a minute to do that. So I'm going to cut out these download parts. But for this one, it's short enough that I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit about something. And that is, in our case, we're going to be using this VirtualBox software. But I would recommend that if you have an old computer, or perhaps a laptop that's being retired, why not use it? Connect it via wired to your routers and be able to use it as your server. You can then get some very convenient services running, like perhaps SMB file share, or if you'd like, a gaming server. They're very useful for that purpose, and between me and my wife, we use it to copy files back and forth. Yes, you can do that in other ways, but sometimes we just like to copy all of our pictures or all of our movies all in one place and have it in one place. As we can see, this is done, so let's get installing that right now. As you can see, it mounts this DMG file, which is basically an external, it's an image, and in that image it contains it's kind of like a CD where it contains all of these files inside it. So basically we've unzipped it of sorts. And what we're going to do is double click on the VirtualBox package for Mac. This is how you install it. Double click on it. Press continue. Oh, we're already running it. So I have to close my older version. And yes, there's a new version, which we are going to install. Let's try that again. Continue, continue, and install. I'm not too worried because I've installed VirtualBox over older versions of VirtualBox many times, and that's apparently how it does its updating, so I'm not too worried about that. So I go ahead and write these files. As you could probably see, I did already have a couple of virtual machines created, and I was using. One of these was for testing this particular broadcast I'm doing, so I'm going to change that. I'm going to actually delete that guy. Now, in our applications folder, we have Go ahead and press V, get to the V's. We have VirtualBox. I'm going to go ahead and eject this. Eject it off my desktop. It says there is an extension pack that we can use. I did download an extension pack before, so now it wants to upgrade this extension pack, and that's fine. We'll let that finish and install and do its upgrade. And yes, I agree. Of course I agree. Don't we all agree? Success. This is going to be the one we're going to recreate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. I've already done it in testing just to test for this video. And I do have another couple of them loaded that I do various testing on. And you can do this too. If you have a copy of Windows, you can also install that, or a different version of Linux perhaps. You can do these as well. What I'm going to do for this purpose is going to click on New and create a new one. And I'm going to call it, just to be different from the other one, Ubuntu Linux. The other one was called Ubuntu. I'm going to call this one Ubuntu Linux. As you can see, it's already picked a type and a version. It does happen to be the 64-bit version that I did download. So I've already checked that. At this point, we're going to need to give it more RAM than 512. 1024 seems good for our purpose. If you're going to be running this for installing a lot of software and running something that's a memory hog, like a service like domain DNS or DHCP, you'd want more. You want more RAM there. But for our purpose, we're not going to do any kind of service like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new virtual hard drive as well. This is naming the virtual file system that we're going to create, and it's just going to call it the same name. And 8 gig is fine for what we're doing right now. These are the different types of images that you can create, virtual hard disk images. We're going to go with VDI. If you were going to export this to something other than VirtualBox, you'd want to probably pick some of these other ones so that you could export it into other types of virtual software like Parallels or maybe VMware. But for our purpose, we're going to stick with VDI because we're not going to export this to some other type. And we're going to pick dynamically allocated because it won't actually allocate that full 8 gig unless we need it. So this keeps it short. You could do the full 8 gig right now, but you don't need to. We're going to pick dynamically allocated and hit create. As you can see, it does not take long. We're going to make a couple of changes though before we boot this system. One thing we're going to do is we're going to change storage. And here we're going to click on our IDE controller that it created for us. You can see down here is our hard drive. Up here is our CD drive, our virtual CD drive. So in this virtual CD drive, we're going to click this little plus sign, and we're going to say choose disk. Now here is where previously I went to ubuntu.com, as you can see, and I went to download and I went to server. And then I downloaded this install package. This is downloads in ISO. And what we're going to do is mount that ISO in here. As you can see, it's right there. It did this to me before too, where it would refuse to let me click on it. And I don't know why it did this before, so I'm going to have to kill it. I can't seem to get past it. I'm going to do cancel, cancel. Nothing like live. Now we've got a dead window. Lovely. Well, we're going to kill this. We're going to restart it. Press V for VirtualBox. That's a quick way to get there. Now, as I was saying, click on the Ubuntu Linux to make sure you're editing the correct one, and then click on Storage, and then click on the plus sign, click Choose Disk, and we're going to choose that Ubuntu image that we downloaded previously. That took me about 20 minutes to download. I'm going to do Open, and hit OK. One other thing we want to change is we want to be able to reach this server that we're going to install. And we can't reach it if we just ran an install right now. The reason is because if we click on networking, you can see that it enables a network adapter, but it uses network address translation. And what we want to do is be able to reach this device. If we do network address translation, then we have to write rules as far as being able to reach this particular device, this particular virtual host. We want to do bridging. Bridging allows it to just piggyback onto our wireless interface of our MacBook. And that is what we want, because we want to be able to reach this virtual server from both this Mac and also other devices on this network. For our purposes, this suits us fine, and we can do OK. That's the only changes we wanted to make. At this point, we can start, and it's going to boot off that virtual CD-ROM that we installed. Let's go ahead and click Start and see how that goes. And there it is. It's already booted. The virtual systems are much faster because it's all in memory and all on hard drives. No waiting for a CD-ROM to spin up. In this case, we're going to go ahead and click in here. You notice my mouse disappeared, and that's because I clicked into this virtual. That means it took over my mouse and keyboard. So at this point, there is no mouse, but I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter for English. Here we have different things we can do. I would recommend that if you're following along and you're going to install it on a separate machine, in other words, non-virtual, I would recommend that you check the disk for defects. It is very frustrating to get halfway through your install and your CD-ROM didn't write correctly. So do that check once and then you know that it's good. Also test your memory, because if you're dealing with a system that you've just resurrected from retirement, then you might want to check its memory if it's been sitting in a closet for a while. For our purposes though, we don't need to do that because we're virtual, so we're going to choose the first option, which is Install Ubuntu Server. I just pressed Enter. You may get some errors about our CD-ROM drive. Yeah, there they are. You can ignore those. It's going to install anyway. Here it's asking us for our keyboard language. We're going to choose English and United States keyboard. I've had good success with saying no here. Not sure exactly how it would detect a virtual layout of a virtual keyboard, so I'm going to not allow it to do that. I'm going to say no, and then pick an English US keyboard. At this point, it's detecting our CD-ROM drive. It should find it successfully and begin the install. Here's where we would name our host. When I performed this install on a separate box, I called it Home. For this case, we're going to call this Ubuntu. And I'll show you why this is important later. But for now, let's call this Ubuntu. Here we enter the username, the actual text name of the user. I'm going to call it Lauren MJ. Now here is the actual username, so this is the important part where we'll be typing this in to log in. So I'm going to shorten it to LMJ. And now a decent password. And one more time. I am not going to do encryption. For our cases, we're not doing any payment card industry type of work, and we're also not storing anything that is considered private on our test box, so I'm going to say no to this encryption. It should correctly see our time zone, which it does. I'm in Oklahoma, so I'm in the America-Chicago time zone, and this is correct. So I'm going to click yes. Here you have choices. The first choice will use the entire disk, and it will create everything you've got on your disks and be able to use it all. to create your Linux system. You could also do the same thing but use LVM. LVM is a way of using a virtual disk. It's a virtual management of your disks. It allows things to be expanded or shrunk later. You could also do that same thing with encryption. I have no need for the encryption, as stated before. However, I would like the flexibility of being able to add a volume or delete a volume later. So I'm going to choose the second one. You can choose the first, but you're left with less choices in the future. So I'm going to choose the second one. Here it detects our virtual SCSI-3 device, and it sees 8.6 gig it can use. Now here is the point of no return. If you click yes here, it's going to start writing changes to the hard drive. It hasn't written any changes yet, but after this point, there will be no going back. At this point, you will be destroying whatever system you used to have on your real box. In our case, it's virtual, so it was blank, so there's no problem with choosing yes. But if you're installing this on your old laptop, this is the last chance you get to recover those things off your old laptop, because they're going to be gone after you click yes here. And we're going to take advantage of the whole thing, so I'm just going to press enter. And one more "are you sure" type thing. Yes, write the changes to the disk. At this point it copies what it needs over to the hard drive, so it's a little faster for the rest of the install. In a corporate environment, you would have a proxy, but in our case, we're just home, so we don't have a proxy here. So I'm going to hit continue. Let's briefly review our outline. Bring that up. We already finished up to this point, answering questions right now. As soon as we're done answering these questions, we'll have a fresh system installed, so we definitely need to upgrade and update, patch it up to the latest, just in case of any bugs or problems. After that, I picked an application that's not by default installed. It's called TMUX. TMUX is a great application for being able to log into a device, start up processes, and then be able to log out of the device with those processes still running. This will be important to us later. Also going to briefly show you what little I know about TMUX. There's another application similar, a bit older than TMUX, called Screen. It works very similar. You can choose what you like, but most of the cool kids these days are using TMUX, so we're going to use that too. Get used to it. I come from the Screen days, but as a friend of mine pointed out to me, all the kids are using TMUX, so we should use TMUX. When we're adjusting these firewalls, I'll first adjust the firewall that's on the Linux system. That's called a host firewall. Those prevent us from opening the services on that box. The next firewall we're going to alter is the next up in the chain, which is our ISP's firewall. That firewall needs to be altered because I want to eventually reach this server from outside of my own network. So we're going to have to create a hole in our ISP's firewall so that we can reach those services. For our specific service, we're going to do SSH. If you're installing this in a corporate environment and definitely want to install something you're going to put in production, then you would definitely pick the first option. You don't want to have automatically updates to any services that you run in a production system. You want to carefully apply those updates, only during a downtime window. For our purposes, though, this is only a test. So I definitely want to keep this device up to date when it can. So we're going to do the second one, which is install security updates automatically, which is the safest option. We are going to install one of these services for now. We're going to do the first one. So I just press the space bar to select the first one. It's called Open SSH Server. That's later the hole we're going to open in our firewall. I will address these other ones, and I'll talk briefly. DNS server is a server for changing names to IP addresses, which I may go through that as well. I do manage our DNS service at work, so I could go through that if we need to. LAMP is a way of quickly configuring up something like an Apache web server so that you could provide content off of this server. Definitely don't want to get into either of these without knowing what you're doing, and especially if you're going to open up to the world. Mail is its own animal, and we won't be running any mail services. I definitely will need a database for some things I'm going to be doing, but I'm not going to install that yet. I'll get to that later. You don't have to install these right now. You can always install this stuff later, and it's fairly easy to do. Just like we're going to install TMUX, you can install any of these. So for right now, we're just going to leave it as an open SSH server and continue. You notice it picked out about 189. It went by very fast. But you saw about 189 different packages that it installs. Because I picked SSH server, there are many packages that are needed by SSH server that I did not pick. So it did what we call a dependency check. That dependency check means it's going to install all the packages that SSH server depends on. That's definitely something you want it to do. If we had to pick all of the little packages ourselves, we would no doubt get it wrong or miss a package that was critical. So this is a good thing that Linux does these days, is it installs these dependencies for you and picks them out. Cleaning up. I sense a reboot coming. Oh, grub. One more thing. Definitely want to load grub, and I'm going to click yes here. Grub is a bootloader, and a bootloader allows you to put multiple operating systems on the same system. We're going to continue here so that it goes ahead and reboots. And it also looks like it's going to eject our CD-ROM for us. That's nice. Grub does allow other operating systems to be loaded on the same hard drive, and then you can optionally boot them. That menu that just popped up is the grub loader. You could also install Windows on this device and then have an option to boot when you first come up. And you could use the grub menu to pick Windows or some other Linux install if you wanted. For our purposes, we're not going to do that. We're not going to install multiple, but it is still good to have grub loaded because it gives you that window of opportunity when you first boot that perhaps if you're rescuing the system or having a problem with it, you can send options to the bootloader and instead of load a different version of the operating system or a rescue disk. So we go ahead and install grub, even though we're only going to install one operating system. So I'm going to log in with that username and password that I entered before. And because I'm the only user, I should be a super user. So what I'm going to try is I'm going to try to verify that by doing sudo, they call it. And then I'm going to do su-. What this does is gives us a root prompt. I'm attempting to elevate my privileges as a root user. So it will ask for my password again. So I typed that same password again, and I did. It worked. I am now root. As root, and on our first boot, we definitely want to do an upgrade and update of our system. The way you do this is you do apt-get update. And then let her rip. This shouldn't take too long. The second part will take a little bit longer. We're also going to do an upgrade. We want to do an update and then an upgrade. Update updates only your currently installed packages and gets everything ready to do other updates. An upgrade will remove any dependencies we don't need anymore, and it upgrades things like our kernel. So it's definitely something you want to do, because our kernel is probably already out of date. As you can see, it found 17 packages that we need to upgrade. Go ahead and let this finish. And we're done. I am fairly new to Ubuntu, and I'm told that we also want to do a dist upgrade. I'm not sure what the difference is here, but I'm going to follow the advice. I think this is for the entire distribution. It goes through our current entire distribution and updates everything. I did notice this does take some time, so I am going to pause and cut this out, and I'm going to come back in when I get a prompt back. And we're back. As you can see, I have returned to a prompt. It took about 10 minutes or so. At this point, I want to briefly talk about something I just ran through, and that is whenever we did sudo su-, you have to be a super user to do this. What it does is it allows you to run any command right here as root. We could have easily done something like this, and then after we did that, did this, and then did this. We could have all done it that way, but because I did it this way, it opens up a prompt for me, and then from that point on I don't need the sudo anymore. That's the reason I did that. As you can see, we did a full upgrade, so at this point I have nothing left to get. So if I did an update, it's a good idea to keep doing these until you get nothing back. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're getting nothing back, which means that we are fully upgraded, which is good. At this point, we definitely want to reboot before we take any more steps. That's pretty easy and fast on a virtual system, so a quick way to do that is to the old Unix throwback of init 6. What this does is it starts the init process, tells it to switch to run level 6. Actually, the init process is already running. Most Unix systems have the init process, and you're telling it to go to run level 6. If I did run level 3, that's what we already are, so this would have no effect. 1 is a single user mode. 0 is to shut down. The others aren't used except in rare cases. Sometimes 4 or 5 are used for desktop systems to load into X Windows. For our purposes, we want to do the reboot process, which is init 6. This should be quick. That didn't take long at all. I'll log back in. And here, I'm now going to do the next thing. So we did the upgrade and update. Now I'm going to show you how to install an app. For our cases, we're going to use TMUX. So let's do, and I'll do it this way just to show you it can be different. I'm going to run the apt-get install TMUX as root. It's going to ask for my password again. Notice it doesn't do this all the time. There is a timeout value. It's already installed. I didn't know that. Back to our outline. Now we're going to briefly show you some things about TMUX. TMUX, you start by just typing in TMUX. And I don't do this as root. I like to do this as a single user, because I don't want to create temporary files that someone can take advantage of and be able to take over a session as root. So I run TMUX as my normal user, And as you can see from my prompt, I am still logged in as a normal user. So I'm just going to invoke TMUX. You might think it did absolutely nothing, but it did do something. We are now inside TMUX, and we opened a shell. At this point, any commands we can do are just like normal, except we can open another window. Well, we call them windows, but actually they're just different screens or different terminals. The way you invoke a second terminal, as you can see, we'll call this one Terminal 1. So I'm just having that echoed back to the screen, just so we have a marker that this is Terminal 1. What you do here is you do Control B and then do C, the letter C. And now it started a new session. As you can see from down below where it says on the bottom left, it shows bash dash bash asterisk. The bash asterisk shows me that that's the one I'm currently in right now. And the way we switch back is we do Control B and then P for previous screen. As you can see, now my first bash has an asterisk next to it, and I'm back in Terminal 1. Control B and N for next takes me to my Terminal 2. This is important because we could be running several commands. One command we could run in this window. Oh, HTOP is not loaded. There's a good example we could do. Let's install it. HTOP is a great replacement for the top utility, the old top utility. It does a nice job of showing us what's going on in the system. So let's run that. As you can see, I have installed it, and now I'm running HTOP in this screen session. And notice down in the bottom left, it shows now I'm running HTOP in this screen session. So let's switch back to the other session, the other terminal. Control B and P for previous, and this is still here. This obviously shows you a very useful feature, that you could be running things that echo things to the screen, and then you could run other things at the same time. As you can see, we switch back and forth. You can even start a third if you like. Control B, C, and now we have 3. Control B in for the next one, Control B in for the next one, Control B in for the next one. If you type exit, it just closes that one. So back to our first one, Control B, P. We're now back in our first one. If we close this one, it raises the second one to our first spot. At this point, I'm going to press Q to quit. Let's run it again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this running, but I'm going to log out of the system. Control B and then D for detach. Notice it says I'm detached. So now I'm back to a normal prompt, and I could exit the system. I'm completely logged out. If you weren't running TMUX and you tried that HTOP, if you logged out of the system, it would kill HTOP. But as it is now, HTOP is still running. In fact, we can open that session back up again by just logging back in. And then running TMUX reattach. I need to be able to list my sessions. There it is, list sessions. I did that wrong. So what we need to do is we need to do list sessions. So there is a 0 session. We're going to use that 0 section and reattach to it. So attach to session 0. Here we are, back again. It never stopped running. So I'm going to stop it now by doing Q. If I exit, it completely kills TMUX because we exited our last window. So that's, in a nutshell, how to use TMUX. Now we're going to alter the firewalls. There's a handy guide UFW is the firewall that we're using in Ubuntu, the one that comes with it. What we're going to do is we're going to open up the services for SSH. And under this page of helpubuntu.com/community/UFW, it shows us how to do this. We can allow SSH by name. So as you can see, this command here, we're going to go ahead and type. We might as well do it in TMUX. So I'm going to do UFW allow SSH. Rules are updated. So let's do a status. We did not enable. Enable. Status. So as you can see, we're opening port 22 from anywhere. 22 is SSH. So at this point, we should be able to SSH into this device. Let's look to see what our IP address was. So as you can see, I got an IP address on my local network, and it shows attached to ETH0. The INET address is 192.168.0.111. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to attach to this from somewhere else. And that somewhere else at this moment is going to be an iTerm session. Now this iTerm session is running on this, not on a virtual system, but in my real Mac. I should be able to ping that system I have now created. I can. So I'm going to SSH to it. Since I've never connected this before, it doesn't recognize it. So I'm going to say yes, that's okay. And then I'm going to type in my password. And now I'm logged into it remotely, so to speak. At this point, I'm going to detach this session. So I do Control B, D for detach. And now I can exit the system and walk away. Now, from now on, I can manage the system without having to log into the console. I'm logged into it here from my Mac. So from here, I can do TMUX attach to 0. And here I am. I've now loaded up that terminal session that I was running before. And I can do all of my administration tasks now without having to walk over to the system and use the console. Back to our outline. So we've completed this. That was fairly simple to do. We didn't have any fancy rules, so we're just going to open SSH to the world. Not something you'd want to do for the most part, but for our system test, that's okay. You could go to this web page and start looking for different ways that you can do allowing access from specific networks. And you definitely want to follow that. Something else I do want to do is turn on logging. So let's turn logging on. How do we turn logging on? Is it logging on? Yes. We want our firewall to log. Logging is enabled. Very good. So at this point, we've completed the host firewall. Now we need to alter the firewall that is preventing everyone in the world from reaching this system from outside our network. Obviously, from inside our network, we can reach it. But from outside, we can't. And the way we do that, in my case, I have this particular ISP. So what I've done is I've gone to the routing, the page where I can control this router. In your case, this might be different, but I would believe that this particular ISP probably stays pretty consistent. In this case, you would just want to load this URL into your web page, and it's going to bring you the ability to alter your firewall and alter your systems and settings. There is a firewall running out there. I'll show you what the design of my network is currently, just so it's clear. The outside world is here. It's on the outside of my ISP's firewall. Outside, I have a real address that's routable on the internet. Inside, address of this firewall is here, and that's the one we've connected to via our website. Now, I do have the Wi-Fi disabled on my ISP's router. It did come with it as an extra service, but I found it to be inadequate. So I run my own Wi-Fi router that I purchased separately. It is here. And underneath this Wi-Fi router, I run all of my other clients. My laptops, my wife's laptop, my tablet, my phone, my wife's phone, and any of my guests, they can all jump on this Wi-Fi. My server, though, I want it out here. You see, it's directly connected into the back of my U-verse router. And it has its own address on that network. There are also other things connected into my network, DVR and other things that are in use. For our purposes, that is what we're interested in. Now, you can find out this address once you have it plugged in and it did a DHCP request. So, back to our Ubuntu system, you can see if you do ifconfig, you can see what its address is. Now, mine is different, and the reason mine is different is because I am running a virtual system that's underneath one of these clients. So it's on a different network. It's on this network. That was only for demonstration purposes. I did already previously install a separate server, as I recommended you to do. So that sits out here. And that is the one that I want to open up to the world. How do we do that? Well, back on our page for ISP, it takes you to the home page, but I don't want to show that because it does show critical information. So I took a screenshot. I'm going to show you here what that screenshot looked like. Notice I have locked out all the important information that I don't want to share on YouTube. Where you want to go is right here. You want to click Customize Firewall. And that leads you to this page. Here we want to do this. We want to install applications, pinholes, and DMZ. I'll get into what that means. In this case, it's allowing us to select a computer and open up a hole in their firewall. They actually offer this as a service. For our purposes, we want to pick our server, which you remember I called home, as I first described. The virtual one I called Ubuntu, but the real one I called home. So in this case, you want to click Choose Home. That's the computer we'll be dealing with. Our other devices are our wireless routers and our DVRs. We don't want to alter those and open them up to the world. The next step, step 2 here, is to edit the firewall settings for that computer. As you can see, I've already picked Allow Individual Applications. And then what I did was I picked Servers. And I found they already had an SSH server. It used to be in this list. And then I clicked the Add button here. And I added it to the place on the right here. At that point, I just clicked down below here and clicked Save. Another option is to do this. However, this is not as safe. This basically opens up your Linux system to the entire world on every port. You don't want to do this unless you really know what you're doing. You definitely want to only allow the specific servers and holes in the firewall that you need. For our purposes, we just need the SSH server. As you can see, I don't know if you noticed this when it first got here, but I did go down to user defined and I created another one. I opened up this service to the world too, so that my friends and I can play on the same game server that I run on this particular Linux box. That's how I did it. You just click here and do Add a new user-defined application, pick the ports you need that that particular service uses, and then click Save there. The other item you'll need from this particular page, after you've clicked Save and done this, It does take a long time. For some reason, these pages load very slowly. But the next thing you want to do is click on broadband. I'm not going to actually do it. I want to show you a screenshot of what I did because it gives away my real address, IP address, and I don't want to do that. Not on YouTube. So right here it showed my real address out on the internet. That is what you want to copy. That's an important part that you're going to need. Because that is where you're going to save your configuration in other places on your laptop or wherever you want to be out in the world, and then come back here and be able to reach this server. You need to know this address that's written here. Now it may change. For you to get a static IP address from your ISP, you may have to pay some money for that. But I have noticed just anecdotally that this never changes. I do, though, run a DNS system. And that DNS system keeps me up to date on what my current IP address is. And it's a dynamic DNS. A dynamic sort of static DNS service that I use. And it keeps this address up to date with a name that I've registered on internet, which did cost me some money. If you need more information on how to set that up, I can help with that too. But this would conclude what we're doing in this particular video. So at this point, we've completed this last step. As long as you click that save button at the end, you've now saved that configuration into your firewall, and it should be open to the world. You should be able to SSH somewhere else out in the world and then SSH back in and be able to get to your server. The way you test this is I am going to go ahead and log into a system at work. Now I don't want to show this, so I'm going to cut this out. But once I get into work, I'm going to come back to this one and show you that I was able to successfully get in. I'm back. And here's a screenshot that I had to take and alter heavily, of course, because it gives away the IP addresses of where I'm at work and what I'm bouncing around. Here, what I did was I was at my Mac and I logged into the system at work. And from here, I bounced to another system. From there, I bounced back home. Right here where the arrow is pointing, that is where I put that IP address, that public IP address that was on my router, my ISP's router, and it got me right back home. So, briefly, in review, I am Lauren MJ. You can follow me at Twitter at LMJ_OU. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please click like and also subscribe. What we did today was we downloaded VirtualBox and installed it. We downloaded Ubuntu Server and installed it in a VirtualBox under VirtualBox Server software. And then we answered the install questions for Ubuntu Server. I showed you how to upgrade your system. We installed an app. Well, actually, that was already installed. We installed a different app, but I did show you how to use TMUX, which is very useful. I also showed you how to adjust two firewalls. One is the host firewall that's running on this Ubuntu system, and also my ISP's firewall. Naturally, your mileage may vary as far as what your ISP will look like. But I hope these principles were of use to you. Thank you for coming, and in the future, I hope to expand on our system that we have built. I'm going to possibly show you how to install a gaming system. I might also do an SMB file share. Or whatever is requested from users. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.